That's the Lightning Seeds and The Life of Riley, and I am delighted to say that my guest in this part of the programme is the immensely talented Mr. Ian Broudie. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks
Jolly
for that intro.
good. Oh, you're welcome. And it's true. And that song, I every time I hear it and every time I play it, I will never forget Riley's first day at school.
Neither will he.
Because we all bumped into each other at the gates. Fred was older than Riley, but he was going to the same school for the first. That was his first day, and you were at the gates with Becky, waving little Riley in his smart new uniform. First day.
No, it's that's a moment, isn't it, when you first day at school for the mums and dads and for the kids. Really.
It's unbelievable, and to think now he's off to Malaga today.
yeah.
Time flies.
Yeah.
Because not a lot of people realise that was about Riley.
Well, it got waylaid by football a little bit at first, actually, but I think then it gradually made its way back, because I get a lot of people. I used to, actually not so much now, but a few years ago I used to get loads of people saying, oh, I love that song and I've called my son Riley. And lots of people, picked up that it was about that,
Well, of course, I did phone you. I'm terribly excited and hysterical when it was played as the open-top bus was coming along Queen's Drive. When Liverpool had that magnificent, homecoming. And I was on the phone to you going, this is brilliant, and they're playing your tune.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What a day that was.
Oh, it was so exciting, wasn't it? The whole weekend was magnificent, and everybody was so happy, and the turnout was remarkable. So your love of music, is it parallel or equal to your love of football?
I think it's probably, I love music probably more than anything else, but it's very connected for me. It always has been, I think, because I'm quite old. So the first time I went to a football match was the early 60s, really, when I was, 6 or 7 or something. And I think in those days the Cop used to sing a lot of Beatles songs, and it was a very musical thing, and You'll Never Walk Alone. So it was kind of it was my first football game, but it was also a very kind of musical thing with my dad and my uncles all singing You'll Never Walk Alone, and everyone seemed to be singing and playing football. So maybe the two things kind of fused a little bit there.
Well, it certainly has done you well in terms of, because there's been that period, and it still carries on, where whenever you watch some kind of sport, you're always your music can be constantly used, and then of course you had 3 lines. So sport has served you well, hasn't it?
It's only been, when you say it like that, it feels like it's played a bigger part than it has, really, because I think really there was only that little moment where Life of Riley was on, Match of the Day a bit, and then 3 lines, but the rest of the 38 years or whatever weren't like that.
And of course, the first time I became aware of you, I'd been living in Amsterdam, so I was completely, I came back to Liverpool in flares. And it was 1976, and of course Eric's was happening, and I couldn't believe it. I stitched the flares up, made these sort of drainpipe skinny jeans.
Did you have an Afghan coat by any chance?
No, I didn't. I was allergic to patchouli.
that's now looking back later, that's a godsend.
Yes, thank God. But I did go down to Eric's, and I think it's the only club I've ever been a member of. And that was magnificent, wasn't it, in terms of, well, it was like an apprenticeship. It was like a prep school for musicians.
Yeah, well, it was, I suppose, it was Eric's and kind of just Matthew Street in general in those days it was a strange time, really, because it was, obviously Matthew Street had the Cavern and the Beatles and everything, but actually, even though it wasn't that long between, it's only probably about 6 or 7 years between the end of the Beatles and Eric's, really. But it felt like a very, very long time, and the street was kind of derelict, mainly derelict buildings, waste ground, a couple of old warehouses. So it was quite it's quite an odd thing. I mean, when I first went to Matthew Street, it was actually just before Eric's, and I was wandering around town for some reason. I think I'd just left school, and I came across a building, a warehouse, and there was a sign outside that said the Liverpool School of Music, Art, Dream and Pun. And I just thought, what? I felt like I'd entered a magical world really, and I kind of went in, and you could make yourself a cup of tea, and it was, and that's where I met a lot of the people who then, later would be in Big in Japan, and certainly in Eric's,
Well, you look at that lineup, people who sort of went through Big in Japan, likes of Bill Drummond, Jane Casey, obviously, Bill Drummond, yourself, Clive Langer, Ambrose Reynolds, Holly, Budgie, Steve Lindsay, Dave I mean, that's just a who's who.
Yeah, I'm not sure all those were in it, but
they appeared at some point, didn't they?
Did they? Okay, yeah. Possibly, yeah. But there were definitely, it was a time when we all played. We'd all kind of, it was, in a way, it was Eric's. There was a Thursday night in Eric's.
That was the free night.
And it was free.
Yes.
And the local unemployed centre set up cameras, and you could be a director and video bands and local bands. It wasn't really local bands, actually, just people would get up. So a lot of the people who then went on to be in a lot of those bands, we'd all play in various lineups with each other. So, whether it was Pete Burns and Julian Cope and myself and Budgie, and we'd all end up playing some songs together on a Thursday night.
Yeah.
Really.
I loved those Thursday nights. So I was in the audience, so I would see all of these amazing characters and just think, these people are fabulous, they're so wonderful. And then, of course, I got the opportunity to start playing these people, which was the nearest I was going to get to it, because I wasn't going to be able to do anything, that you all could do. But that, as you talk about Matthew Street, such a great street, because it had Probe Records, and then eventually, do you remember the Armadillo turned up, and it was the first time we could get hummus?
Yeah, well, the Armadillo was, I think, where the Liverpool School of Music, Drama and Pun was. That became kind of the tea rooms and the Armadillo, and it, in many ways, it became somewhere. I would head into Matthew Street from Menlove Avenue, where I lived, and Penny Lane, and you'd sort of go into town, and you would basically see people you knew, and there'd be people you knew working in all of those places that you just described, whether it was Probe or the tea rooms, so it was quite a sort of, and it was a funny time, probably in the country, but certainly in Liverpool.
Oh, yeah.
Very kind of a lot of unemployment, felt like prospects weren't good, and quite a dark time in many ways. But this was like a bright spark where, I think for me it was as a little bit of a misfit in a way. I found all these other misfits who liked the Velvet Underground and liked all the things that I liked, which, I felt home, really. And
as you said, I always think of those times as being, there were spots of colour, but if I look back it feels very grey. I don't know what it was, but you had to say to people, do you have a job? You didn't assume that somebody had work. It was quite grim. And thank God for the Army and Navy stores for people to go and be able to buy clothes and cut them up and adapt them.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
That would be so. It used to be so exciting going in there and going, I could turn that into this, I could turn that into that. What do you remember about Big in Japan then, particularly?
It's something that's lasted a long time in kind of legend.
It is, isn't it?
But was quite a short period of time. And I think probably the main lineup would be, I would imagine, as Big in Japan, would kind of be Budgie, myself, Bill, Jane, and Holly. Really, that was the. I think that was for the most part the lineup. We probably, it was exciting for me because I got to go to Sheffield and Leeds, and it was a kind of occasion where, I suppose, because we were probably the first of those groups of the people from Eric's. So all the other groups came slightly afterwards. So Bill was old enough to hire a van, and basically half of Eric's used to get in the van. We used to have a little bit of equipment in the van and about 20 people in a Ford Transit van, and we'd all head off to Leeds or whatever, and so it was quite cool really, because it was like there would be 20 of you and you'd take over to a degree wherever you played, so it was real. It was like, a first experience really of going to clubs in different cities and meeting people from different cities.
Well, let's take a listen to Big in Japan's Suicide A Go-Go. big in Japan and Suicide a Go-Go. My guest is Ian Broudie. And Ian, I did a series for BBC Six Music, which I presented and produced and did all the stuff, called And the Beat Goes On, because we had to realise, we had to let people know that fantastic how much, the Beatles did for the city of Liverpool. But there's been so much more since then, hasn't there?
Yeah. I mean, that was a long time ago, the Beatles, wasn't it? But obviously, they're a hard, they're a hard thing to get around,
exactly.
Really. Well, not that you want to get around them, I love the Beatles, but... there's been a lot of... I think Liverpool is a city of art, you know what I mean? There's always been a lot of... whether it was... We were talking about the early days in Matthew Street, where even though it was derelict, there were a series of fridges, I don't know if you remember, all with ice sculptures in for some reason, for absolutely no logic to that whatsoever. And it's always... it's a city that can surprise you, and... there's just a lot going on.
And now it's just full of people. I go down, there's a certain shop I like in Matthew Street, so I often pop in there, but now it's just streams and streams of tourists wanting to have their picture taken with Cilla Black or with John Lennon on the other side of the street, and they're mad for it. They're absolutely, mad for the history of that street. Can you remember who you went to see at Eric's?
Yeah, I would say on what you just said as well, it took a long time for that to, for anyone to realise that there was literally nothing to mark the Beatles in the era of Eric's, other than, rubble on the other side of the road. I can remember, I saw, for me, actually, actually punk rock, as it were, we all felt like we were probably, that was what we were connected with in a way, that was what we liked. But for me, it wasn't really the English punk bands, I was never... the Clash and the Pistols, they're all okay, but for me, it was really the CBGB's bands that I loved, I loved the Ramones and Patti Smith and Television and, Talking Heads, and I think I saw most of those in Eric's, to be honest, and Iggy Pop, and, I pretty much... It's strange, really, because... I suppose at that time those bands must, not have been all that famous, but I kind of thought they were. So it felt to me like all the bands that I loved and was buying records from, I got to see, in a club that held about 600 people, and usually got to have a bit of a chat with them afterwards, which was brilliant. Yeah,
no, it's incredible, and I think somewhere I've still got an Eric's badge, and I still bump into Doreen, who was the lady on the door,
the legend that is
legendary Doreen Allen. Wonderful. And of course, what was great about it was that they had the matinee gigs, which was an absolute bonus for kids who were underage, weren't allowed to go into licensed venues, so that was great on a Saturday afternoon. We played a couple of them, and that was, you'd get a lot of people coming from, to be honest with Eric's, I think you got a lot of people coming from not just Liverpool, certainly a lot of people from the Wirral and quite far afield, even into Yorkshire and stuff, because in those days, I used to hitch places to see bands as well. I think if a band you liked were on, you would travel because you didn't really get the opportunity to see them that much. You don't see anybody hitching anymore, do you?
No.
When was the last time you saw somebody hitching?
I wouldn't fancy it myself.
No, I don't think I would, actually. Definitely not. So your relationship with Paul Simpson, because I'm thinking about Care.
Yeah.
Because I remember this record and getting it and going, this is amazing, I've got to play it on my show.
Yeah. Well, it was a short-lived kind of collaboration, really. And I think Paul was always, a very talented but slightly sensitive soul. So it was kind of less comfy. We never actually played any gigs, but we spent time writing and being in the studio, and it was really good fun. But we never actually, in a way, it always feels to me like we were never got to properly do it in a way,
And at that stage, were you always, crucial to the production?
I think it's strange that because I've never wanted to be a producer, I've always kind of fought against that, and I think I'm just so awkward that I ended up producing my own things, because I've always had quite a strong vision of how I would like it to be. I think and that sort of led me into being very hands-on in a way.
So have you ever been produced and thought, well, that's not right?
Oh, yes. By myself.
All right, let's play Care and Flaming Sword. I played that to death when I joined Radio 1. I played it every Saturday night for weeks and weeks. That's Care and Flaming Sword. And my guest is the immensely talented Mr. Ian Broudie. And Ian, I don't think you remember this.
I have such fond memories of that song. It's funny hearing it down the headphones here in the studio, because I have really fond memories of Paul, really fond memories of that time in Liverpool.
Yeah.
And getting to put piccolo and bassoons on a record was like fantastic. So.
Everybody was being, well, not everybody, but for me, hearing stuff, getting stuff to listen to and be allowed to play on the radio, there was such an innovative move going on. Do you know what I mean? People were really experimenting, weren't they?
Yeah, no, it was a really good time for, I think just, it seems like you had access. For me, it was fantastic. As I said, I wanted to try and make a record that was very English sounding.
It is, isn't it?
That was really, I always felt when I listened to Paul, one of the main things about his voice and his whole persona was how English it was, and I wanted to sort of reflect that in the kind of instrumentation.
And he always dressed like a 40s matinee idol.
He did,
those suits.
Very baggy.
Nigel Harris says, I wonder if he's going to talk about the time I promoted a gig by his early band, the Original Mirrors, in a former Cardiff college. The gig went down well. Drinking with them went down even better. Never realised it was him until a music article many years after Lightning Seed's success. Original Mirrors, of course. There's so much you've done. It's just incredible. It really is. Now we're talking about, production, and you have produced so many people. Miles Kane, Coral, the list goes on and on and on. And of course the Bunnymen.
Yeah.
And what was that experience like?
Well, as I said, I've never really wanted to, it was never my ambition to be a producer, and still isn't. I think I've got a little bit of a, I feel like I'm a songwriter. But the Bunnymen was a strange situation, really, because obviously they were my pals.
Yeah.
And I was just very opinionated about a couple of demos that they weren't demos, they were their first attempts at a record, really. They'd gone into a studio in Wales, actually, called Rockfield.
Oh, we love Rockfield.
Monmouth, yeah. And, they weren't that happy with the results, and I was quite opinionated about it. So I got a call from their manager, who was Bill Drummond, and record company, saying, the band had liked some of the ideas that I'd been suggesting, and would I be up for producing? And my response was no. I'm not really interested in that, because I don't want to be a producer. And they were said, well, why? And I was like, well, I think it's crossing a line. I'm a musician. It seems like you're sort of stepping out of that world, and would you be able to step back in very easily? So then I got a call back from Bill Drummond, who said, well, why don't you have an alter ego and come up with a name that is an alter ego? It was a very persuasive argument for me at the time, but absolute nonsense. But so he said, if you could think of, is there a name that you could put on it and that person could, produce the record? So I did, really. I put on it a Kingbird production, and we made up this, this persona of Kingbird, and that made it somehow much more palatable to me, which is ridiculous looking back. I felt, oh yeah, of course, that's a whole different prospect.
Yes, I'm a different character now. I'm an alter ego.
That's fine. So producing the Bunnymen was, a real honour for me, because I was, even though they were pals, I was very much in awe of them. I felt like there's every now and again you get a band. Bands sometimes are good for different reasons, and they were a band who the chemistry between those people was just a magical thing, especially when Pete became involved. And obviously a large part of it would be Mac's voice, Ian McCulloch's voice, and
which has got better.
Yeah, and his genius at writing lyrics. But at the time also it was just, I didn't really know what a producer did particularly, and they were my mates. So I think I just sort of joined the band for a while.
So you felt like the fifth member?
It was kind of like that. So we started off, we did a tour in Scotland, in the north of Scotland, and I played guitar and mixed it, and then, you know, I played a lot of guitar on the, you know, so there was no barrier. It was more like a collaboration than a production, really, because obviously if it's your friend, you can you can say what you want, really, because you know you're not, you know that person really well. So that was really a great opportunity for me, really, and I'll always be, I think it was a lovely thing that they were willing to trust just their mate to be in charge of, you know, what was a really important moment, a debut album, and then the third album actually I did. So it was a real, I'll always be so grateful for them for that, you know.
Well, we thought we'd play Pride, is that all right?
Lovely.
Brilliant. Echo and the Bunnymen and Pride, produced by Ian Broudie, who's my guest. And on the show, was it last week, had Mick Houghton in The Publicist, and he was saying about the Bunnymen, he kind of thought, because they had a fallout over something, a phrase he'd used to describe them. I won't go into it now, but it's quite funny. And he thought, well, they'll never carry on. He said, but they've proved me wrong. He said, my God, they're still going strong. And they are, aren't they? They're, you know, playing worldwide and selling out tours and what have you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing actually how many. I kind of remember when I was like years and years ago. I remember there being a big article in the paper talking about the Rolling Stones, saying Rolling Stones to go on tour at 30. Disgusting.
Yes.
Disgusting. You know, shouldn't be allowed. Groups shouldn't be made to stop. You know, and it was a bit of a national scandal at the time.
It was, wasn't it? They used to call them the Rolling Wrinklies or something.
Yeah, you know, it was like they were only 30. You know,
and in fact, they completely ignored the fact that in America, blues artists can go on forever.
Yeah, or Frank Sinatra, or anyone
Sinatra,
really.
yeah.
I mean, if you're an artist, you just do what you do, don't you?
Yeah, that's it. That's your thing, and hopefully, you know, long may it continue. So, tell us about your relationship with the lovely Peter Perfides.
Yeah, well, Peter, just a couple of years ago, got in touch and you know, said how much he liked. You know, I did a solo album called Tales Told, and it was. At the time, it was unfortunate timing in a way. It was just after after I'd stopped for a while making Lightning Seeds records or playing gigs, and it was just at a moment when a lot of stuff happened in my life that kind of ground me to a halt. So it was a bit of a strange time. So it kind of just slipped out, and I never really promoted it. It just sort of, and I was quite happy with that, really. It just was out, and some people found it, but not many. And he was one of the people who found it, and he kind of said, you know, I'd love to put this out on vinyl. And he wanted to start a label, Needle Mythology, and he has such a love for music.
He's amazing.
It's you know, it's a lovely thing for someone to put out records for the joy of hearing the record, really, and you know, so I said to him, he said, I haven't really worked out how to do it. I don't think he had the label in place, but he just told me that he would really want to. So I sort of said, great, when you're ready, you know, just give me a shout, and he did.
And as you say, such a fan, such a believer in music, and he chose you first and Stephen Duffy, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And last night we played from Tales Told, a song for no one. We thought we'd play Lipstick now.
Or plan to try, so I'll say goodbye.
Ian Broudie and Lipstick from the album Tales Told. If you haven't got a copy of that, I urge you to, because it's the most wonderful album. It really is. Beautiful. And you're so gentle, aren't you, sometimes? You know, really, really gentle.
I don't know.
I tell you what, though, whilst I've been talking to you, I think you've got a career in audiobooks.
Audiobooks?
I think you should read books.
What sort of books do you think?
You could read whatever you want, but I think you've got such a great voice, and it's so calming and relaxing that, yes, I think you should find a good book and read it to us all.
Okay.
This is from, I don't know, somebody called Keith, who says, looking through a book called Eric's by Jackie Florrick and Paul Whelan, and there's a photo of Big in Japan playing on Matthew Street. Do you remember doing that?
I do. It was, the highlight of the day was that a guy dived from the top of a 5-story warehouse into a into a skip filled with custard.
No!
And I remember thinking, wow, and there was no provision for any safety whatsoever, you know. If he'd have missed, I don't know what would have happened.
Well, it was the 70s. Do you remember the day it closed down?
Eric's?
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
I do, because obviously I went, but also because I was the only one at Radio Merseyside who went, so they sent me to cover it.
Right.
And I did a piece for the news, but yes, it was a very sad occasion, really was.
Yeah, it was the start of a funny, because I remember the police raiding it. I presume that's the night it stopped, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know, so I was there when that happened, and it was a strange thing, because Roger, you know, was for a while was a little bit lost. Roger Eagle. Whose club it was, and then he sort of had Cracking Up, which was more of an idea than never quite became a club, although he had membership cards printed. With no venue, but just some membership cards. But then re-emerged in the International in Manchester. And was always someone who somehow always was surrounded by music and bands, and just such a great guy, really.
For those people who don't know, he had such a knowledge of music and introduced people to so much stuff, didn't he? He was just an encyclopedic knowledge, but a fan, you know.
Yeah, well, for me, you know, I was just a kid, really, on Matthew Street, and I used to, you know, be hanging around, and then we used to rehearse in Eric's in Big in Japan, and I used to do the load in and the load out for the bands and stuff. But he had a fantastic record collection, and he used to give me like 5 records to say, take these home for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And then bring them back, which now, thinking about it, you know, it was his treasured record collection. The fact that he trusted me to take them away and bring them back, you know, actually is again a great thing, really. And I really, it broadened my knowledge of music, the records that he had, because I would never have heard those records otherwise.
That's remarkable that he would do that. And I bet he didn't have on the label your name, you know, Roger Eagle, Janice Chegwin, Ian Broudie, just in case anybody nicked it.
No, they were unmarked.
You, at the moment, what are you up to?
I haven't done a new album for a long time, 14, 15 years, and I've just got a set of songs that I'm really enjoying, and we've been playing a fair few kind of events, really, over the last few years in the summer. I haven't really done a tour for a long time, but so I'm feeling very, I love my band at the moment. I've got great people playing in the band.
Is Riley in the band still?
Riley's in the band.
Yes.
It's just a really good moment. And I'm just finishing off a new album. Plus, it's 25 years since Jollification.
Of course.
So we're going to do, which I'm really excited about, actually. We're going to get to play the London Palladium, which I've only ever really seen on Ken Dodd documentaries and the bit where the Beatles tell the Queen to rattle her jewellery. So I'm really, really psyched about playing there. I think that'll be great fun. And also the Philharmonic in Liverpool.
Oh, so that's going to be brilliant.
Yeah, so it should be 2 great nights in November.
Yeah. And I mean, touring, is it something you enjoy doing?
It's something I didn't used to enjoy doing, because it took a long time for me to be able to sort of sing in public, really. I was on the 3rd album by the time I kind of plucked up the courage to play a show. And when I'd recorded, you know, the first couple of albums at home, and it was when I first started making Lightning Seeds records, it was kind of a funny situation. And then by the time it came to the third album, there was a kind of a pressure on me to play live, but I was very nervous about it. My good friend Terry Hall, the singer, we were writing a fair bit together, and I think we'd just done his album, an album called Home, that if anyone wants to check it out, it's a brilliant album. And he was great, and he said, well, you know, if you're a bit nervous about it, why don't we do a tour together, and we'll have the same band, and I'll sing, and you can sing some, and it'll kind of ease you into it. So the first gigs that I did, we kind of did together, and it was brilliant, really. It was a way of, if you see your mate singing, it's a bit less daunting for you to be to be at the front singing, and it kind of eased me into it, really.
It's interesting because I had Gary Daly on the show the other week, and he's done a brilliant solo album, and I said, will you be doing any dates? He went, no, I can't do dates. I can only do dates if Eddie's the other side of me. You know, he said, I just can't do it on my own. I need Eddie to be, you know, by my side, and I need to know that I can just look at him and he's there, and we can have a quick laugh or whatever. But that's going to be really good then.
Which the shows in November will be really good.
No, I'm looking forward to this. And you just mentioned Terry Hall then, because it's funny, I immediately go back to 1981 when anybody ever mentions Terry Hall specials, anything like that, because I think of the riots in Ghost Town. It's synonymous with that period. And who do you rate at the moment?
Music-wise, it's, I suppose, like everyone, I'm kind of on Spotify, and I kind of have my lists, and they generally kind of tracks from the past and tracks from the present, but mostly tracks rather than albums, I must say.
Yes, I think most people are like that now.
Yeah, and I do think there's some great bits and bobs around, but you know, they're mainly just, it'll be isolated songs. I really like a guy called Yeek, actually, who's a sort of, I like a lot of the homemade records that people make at the moment. Like, they seem to make them at home, and they sound a bit kind of a bit funky, but in a great way, and I'm really attracted to that at the moment.
And I think what's interesting at the moment, we are literally getting music from all over the world. We've had phases, you know, where we get a bit of this and we get a bit of that, but it's very global now, and amazing stuff going on, amazing rhythms and what have you.
Yeah, well, you've got access to everything, really, haven't you? So anything you want, you can find, which is brilliant, really.
And before you turned up, we did play. In fact, at first I was going, Ian Broudie produced that. Ian Broudie produced that. Ian Broudie produced that. And we've got more to come in the programme. We will be playing Coral, Miles Kane and more. But I have to say, what a pleasure, and I thank you so much for your time. And
it's always great to chat to you, Janice, and thank you.
And I wish you a happy birthday for the 4th of August.
Yeah, in Real. Yeah.
In Real.
Sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier.
Right, tell us more.
Yes. And of course, on the 4th of August, on my birthday, I'm really excited about coming to Real. And that should be a great day, really. Yeah, so hopefully it'll be sunny.
Yes, and people should turn up with cards and presents.
Yes, if they like.
And to celebrate jollification, we're going to play the Lightning Seeds. Lucky you. You take care, Ian.
Thanks very much.
All right, lots of love.
Right,
bye-bye. Bye-bye. The Lightning Seeds and Lucky You. And what a pleasure it was to talk to Ian Broudie. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Right, we'll have gossip before the news. Standing in the way of control.